you so much. I think this next 45 minutes, the lightning talk, is all about securing national interest, the role of supply chain connectivity. And we have two incredible speakers here. Um, 2 weeks ago, I had lunch with Michelle. She just blew me away. But towards the end of the lunch, I wanted to make sure I let her know because I asked her when did she start her journey into this thing, and she said in 1973, 76. That's the year I was born. So, and that didn't go really well. But in any case, so maybe we start with a quick introduction, couple of minutes. Maybe we start with John, your introduction for next couple of minutes.
Sure, John O'Grady. I used to start these saying I'm Austin's most eligible bachelor. I can't anymore because my fiance's in the crowd, and so I'll just go with the basic 30-year Army veteran, currently working with Raytheon now. I'm the director for Army Innovation and also the director of strategic engagement, focused predominantly within the Texas Triangle in terms of that strategic engagement piece. And when you think about an innovation ecosystem, right, that's a phrase that gets bandied about pretty routinely these days, and people are more than happy to tell you about their innovation ecosystem. I always start asking, well, explain to me the parts of that ecosystem, and then the conversation usually starts falling a little flat then. And so when you think of an innovation ecosystem, there's some fundamental parts that have to be there. Venture capital, entrepreneurs, clearly, big companies, academia, government support, local, ideally all the way up through federal, and then just a community that is supportive like you see here in Austin. And so in that strategic engagement role, I get to interact with all those bits and pieces of that ecosystem, so it makes it fun, very interesting. And then I also advise startups as well as C-suite and sports teams as part of my leadership advisory business.
Thank you. Michelle?
Oh, works now. Michelle Foss. I'm actually a South Louisiana native. I think my most important biological fact, considering that there are a whole bunch of ex-Army and current Air Force people around here, is that I was born at Camp Pendleton. So I'm a Marine Corps brat, Semper Fi, very proud of it. Long family history in the Marine Corps, where I'm from. I'm part of the Baker Institute. That's Jim Baker, the man who used to run Washington, still does, actually, in the background. Former Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury. We are a think tank based at Rice University, like Hoover Institute at Stanford, for instance. I'm part of the Center for Energy Studies. This is actually post-retirement entertainment for me. I was the chief energy economist over at UT for many years, part of the Bureau of Economic Geology. I'm working across the energy and minerals and materials supply chains. So to the point of the panel today, really supply chains for life. That's how we have to think about them. We had the COVID experiences that created disruptions. We had Ukraine that created disruptions. Everybody has been learning a great deal about that. We're looking at the similarities, the differences, how this impacts outlooks, expectations about what we can do both in energy and then other arenas. And between the civilian and defense, again, the point of the panel, sometimes those are seamless, sometimes not so much. So we're looking at how those interact and what the dynamics are.
Yeah. Thank you so much, both of you. Incredible background. I think Michelle, so when we met last time, so when we were discussing about the supply chain issues all around, you mentioned your experiences in countries like Ukraine and other places over the years. She has spent 20 plus countries and related to supply chain matters. So I was just trying to understand maybe your perspective on the implications of policy when it comes to securing or addressing the national security through the supply chain connectivity?
You go first. All right, so I'll start, since most of the time I cover the beginning of the supply chain, the raw materials themselves. To be clear, what we're talking about are two really big streams of materials. One comes from organic molecules, hydrocarbons, that go all the way into petrochemicals and the products that we get from them. And then the second big stream, in general terms, inorganic molecules and the products that we derive from them that largely come from mining non-fuel minerals and extracting those into metals and other products that go into various things. These supply chains compete in some instances. One of the biggest points of competition is the substitution from metals with plastics. So if I was to ask you today, what is the fastest growing commodity out there in terms of the suite of commodities that we use, and it doesn't matter what it's for, whether it's for civilian applications and products or whether it's for defense, your answer needs to be plastics and rosins. So remember that. Without those, we wouldn't be anywhere. They're lighter weight, they're stronger. We've been able to substitute from heavier metals to improve aerodynamics, how vehicles perform on land, and so on.
Why that?
These are interlocked and heavily integrated value chains. I'm extracting a ton of equivalent material from some point all the way to the finished good that's going to get delivered to Raytheon or any of the other companies that was here today. I have to extract it, process it. I have to get it from the point of extraction and processing to wherever the next stage of development is, to the intermediate product. I have to get it from there, sometimes back again to another location for fabrication and manufacturing, and then I have to get it to whoever is going to finally take possession of that product. Those interlocking supply chains are global because we thought that was a great idea at the time that all of this was evolving, but they're also very regional in character and how they perform. We have a very, very big player in materials supply chains today that has created a great deal of consternation for everybody else, and that is China. So we can't shy away from that. They dominate on the metal side. They also dominate increasingly on the chemicals, petrochemical side, and plastics. And so, this is a geopolitical matter. It's a security matter. These supply chains don't work and can't deliver to critical applications, whether it's in the healthcare businesses, medical grade materials for all of that, or to a field of action in conflict. Both things are problems, obviously. And the policy making associated with that, to be honest, is a mess. It involves similar coordination across various offices of governments, not just ours, but other countries. Lots of interaction in order to ensure that you have the right approach and the right framework to encourage development of raw materials in the first place, the right framework to support manufacturing, the logistics support where you need it, and then all of the things associated with consumer use or industrial use or defense use and end-of-life management. And I would say on the whole, there's a great deal of work to do on that front these days.
Yeah, so as I was listening, I was jotting down a few notes, and the one thing that really struck me is, so I just was up in Boston for the last 45 days, and I'm originally a New Yorker, so forgive me, but even when folks are trying to make the supply chain efficient, it's still a wicked hard problem, right? And so now you inject just a little bit of turbulence into that and forget about it, right? And like you said, we saw that during COVID. regardless of your political views. I think we're starting to see it a little bit with a lot of this tariff conversations that are going on as well. And so it makes something that's already very complex and difficult exponentially more so. And that's not necessarily a good thing, clearly. And then the other piece of it was, as you were talking about kind of globally, I was brought back to a little bit of my military history, and a lot of these products and materials in whatever form, whether they're the raw form or ready to be put together and produced, are moving across sea lanes, especially so, right, until they get onto some form of terra firma, and then it's rail and cargo movement, etc. And if you look at the globe and you just take a minute, there's about 5 critical points that are very narrow, that large amounts of supply move through. Suez Canal, one. Panama Canal, another. And I can name 3 or 4 others for you. And you may recall in the news, it seems like it was just a couple of years ago, could be 10 for all I know now, but that one cargo ship in the Suez Canal kind of got jammed sideways a little bit and backed it up. And each day, that was literally billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of impact just to an economy, let alone actually getting products and materials out on time to those who need it the most in a national security standpoint. And so when you look at that, you go, okay, how hard would it be to disrupt the Panama Canal? How hard would it be for an adversary to disrupt the Suez Canal? Probably not too difficult, really, when you think about it. So that's another concern that I have when I think through this supply chain national security nexus.
I think that's interesting because I think, to John, you're thinking around what happens in Suez Canal and the implications of policy and the national security when it comes to supply chain. I'm pretty sure most everybody is paying attention to these keywords these days: Greenland, Ukraine, Taiwan, Panama Canal, Suez Canal, all of these things. I think people are connecting the dots, and I think that is the highlight these days. So supply chain is in the center of everything. I wanted to ask you, especially to John, I have seen several interesting articles on Raytheon's collaborations with the federal government in the area of supply chain resiliency. So I was just interested in, especially in Raytheon's activities, because as a prime contractors, your job is you're not as an OEM, you're just integrating all of these things into a platform. So I'm just interested because for an OEM, if it is challenging for you, it becomes extremely challenging. So I was just interested in your thoughts on supply chain resiliency and then your works with the government.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna, and now this isn't necessarily ours, but to your point, we do have a play in it, right? And so just prime agnostic, okay? The F-35 Lightning II aircraft, right? The most advanced, newest aircraft that we have in our inventory. Over 1,800 suppliers from 10 different countries and over 300,000 individual parts for either electronics, aviation, avionics, subsystems, etc. Okay? Now, all you need is one of those 300,000 to not be where it needs to be when it needs to be there, and the whole thing comes to a screeching halt. All right? And hopefully those 10 countries, Turkey used to be one of those countries, and in 2019, for reasons that the administration at the time deemed appropriate, and I kind of tend to agree with them, Turkey is no longer one of those 10 countries. So it used to be 11 countries. And so that kind of goes to the point of where is all of this coming from, right? And so there's a lot of talk about onshoring, sure, but that's not going to solve the problem, right? None of these problems, again, I go back to the Boston accent of wicked hard problem, okay? None of them are going to be solved with a single solution. They're all going to have to be multimodal solutions. And so when you start getting to that aspect of it and thinking through it, you really have to understand where it's all coming from, whose hands it's going through. And so Raytheon, as an example, has just partnered with DARPA recently. And so really it's Raytheon BBN. It's one of our subsidiary companies. And what they're doing is supply chain resilience, essentially through proprietary modeling and simulation. And so it's a little bit predictive analysis, but it's also, it brings in, to my knowledge, for the first time in a meaningful way, human behavior and socio-economic as well as geopolitical factors to start to predict in advance stressors and impacts to a global supply chain, and then also offering recommendations to mitigate those. And so that's one example, I think, I know, of how Raytheon is investing and doing it in collaboration with the government, in this case, DARPA, primarily.
I think your point about it's not a Raytheon only, it's just prime agnostic, and everybody faces the same issue. I was just going to jump to Michelle real quick about the same issue, supply chain resiliency, especially with your involvement in understanding the supply chain as it relates to advanced carbon materials. And I'm just more interested in your perspectives on supply chain resiliency with carbon when it comes to the advanced carbon materials, and what can be done when it comes to some of the disruptions. Because there is always, I think the disruptions are not going to go away. I'm pretty sure there will be disruptions ahead too. So I was just wondering your thoughts on those areas.
So, first of all, to go back to some things that John pointed out, this network of 300,000 parts and how many suppliers?
Yeah, so from 10 countries, 1,800 suppliers, roughly.
This has been evolving since the end of World War II, really probably since the end of the Korea War. So over the course of 70 years, roughly, we have engaged in procurements with least cost suppliers who met performance criteria wherever they were located. One of the things that happened on an accelerated basis when China entered the World Trade Organization in 1991 was a speed up in that global network of suppliers, particularly in Asia and particularly with China as a major player in providing both intermediate products and finished goods. So this whole idea of onshoring and nearshoring will take decades to reverse, at least to some degree, depending on how much we feel we need to recapture in order to be comfortable that our security needs are met. On the material side, there are some particular problems. Metals that we don't produce anymore, either at all ourselves, that we don't process, that even more importantly, because byproducts that come out of processing are key, and the components that they go into that we no longer manufacture. So it's a three-prong issue. And one of the things, in fact, while y'all are here at South by Southwest this week, we have CERA Week going on in Houston. It's a major global energy conference, and that happens in Houston every spring. And we had a private discussion with the leadership of the mining industry yesterday, and everyone is swamped with the scale of the problem. If you think about the news that you read, the issue is 55 minerals or 70 minerals, or maybe it's only 22 minerals and metals that we're really concerned about. 5 or 6 of those can be replaced with advanced carbon materials. So one of the things that we're starting to look at when we think about policy and we think about the options that we have, and I'm going to use this word optionality It's a great word. What flexibility do we have? We can try really, really hard to recapture, to onshore, to friend shore, whatever the strategy is on the one of or more of those 5 or 6 key metals that are really integral to everything. Or we can leapfrog them and look for substitutes. And that's something that is an active conversation at Rice around the materials that we've invented. Vinod mentioned Rice's position in nanomaterials in terms of research. So a shared Nobel Prize for carbon nanotube inventions was awarded to Richard Smalley years ago. We've progressed in the years since then in that material, and we're now in the process of commercializing it. I brought some samples, and I understand there's going to be a break later on, and I'll stick around and people can take a look at it. But let's say that one of my 5 metals is copper. And really, people are obsessing on copper. I think that's safe to say right now. It's very, very difficult to stand up new copper operations in the United States. We only really have one large active refinery anymore, and that's at Bingham Canyon in Utah. We use copper everywhere to conduct electricity in buildings and vehicles and everything else, right? I can manufacture this out of carbon atoms derived from a lot of different sources. I can organize those carbon atoms. So if you've heard the word graphene, into a sheet of graphene. I can roll that sheet of graphene into a nanotube. I can take zillions of those nanotubes and I can convert them into a string. This string is as strong as metal. It can support 50 pounds, the sample that I've got, and it can conduct electricity, and it's a thermal conductor. So I can take this, I can weave it into a fabric, and I can use that fabric as the next generation Kevlar to protect personnel. I can take these fibers, I can mix them in an epoxy with titanium and give him a better skin for his F-35. We can do a lot of those things. We can put them into building materials, we can put them into packaging, we can put them into medical grade devices. We now have an experiment using our product at Rice in a neural implant that researchers at MIT are developing for neural diseases. I think that's really the essence of the problem in terms of where we stand. The previous administration, a lot of pot stirring happened on supply chains, a lot of motion took place to try to figure out what to do, what to invest in, how to recover the mining industry in the United States, how to preserve oil and gas operations for the essential materials that we need. Who are our friends? Who are our enemies? What do we do about these choke points around the world that affect our supply chains? And we still have to deal with some of that. But to me, wherever we have the opportunities to substitute and move advanced materials into the picture that can even outperform the existing materials, that's what I think we need to focus on. So I'm kind of speechifying a bit, but you're not going to get this in the news media. Nobody's going to talk about it. People aren't aware that we have solutions through invented materials to take care of a lot of our resiliency problems, both in industry and in consumer products and defense.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so, it's interesting. I'm sitting here thinking about as you're talking, and, you're right, the media is not going to talk about it, right? They'll talk about eggs, which are important, right? And that's supply chain too, but that's about as simple as you're going to get, right? Like, you need like a male chicken called a rooster, I think, right? You need a female chicken, and you got an egg, and then move the egg someplace to sell it. I'm sure I'm oversimplifying this. But nonetheless, now you take what you're talking about, and you're talking, I don't think disruptive technologies per se in its truest definition, but real close, right? And you could argue one way or the other on that. But with every disruptive technology, there's always the people who are going to lose. And they tend to be the entrenched, well-established companies, corporations, etc. And therein lies, I think, some of the key challenges with that, right?
That's in any industry, when we look at what does happen in transitions, inertia associated with the legacy interests is definitely there. They were all in that room at CERAWeek yesterday, I can assure you.
Yeah. Interesting. Thanks.
I think we are also discussing about the role of academia in this domain, right?
Yeah.
Supply chain.
The chicken or the rooster, one of those, the hen or
Yeah,
the
right.
I wanted to throw the bleeding edge of things that's happening now, the IoTs, the blockchains, the AI, the machine learning. I'm pretty sure there are roles for these technologies to be played in either smoothing, speeding up the supply chain, or helping to reduce the complexities associated with supply chain. So just interested in your perspectives about the role of advanced technologies in this domain.
Yeah, so again, when I think about that with the national security hat on, and we just heard it here with Michelle speaking about it, right? The one thing that I absolutely love about, many things I love about this country, but the one thing is our academic institutions and this notion of a curiosity and a freedom of thought and a bias for action that you find in those institutions. And you spend time around some of these young people who are working on these wicked problems, and it's really inspiring. And so, in my mind, there isn't an answer that we don't have or won't have, that we don't have yet, right? To whatever problem exists out there. The problem, we have the answers. We maybe just haven't found it yet, or the people who are working them in disparate locations haven't bumped into each other yet, right? Because lots of times it takes somebody working on something here, somebody working on something there. Next thing you know, they meet at a conference, and all of a sudden, boom, it's the magic moment. It's the watershed moment that really propels a technology forward. And so I think that's one part of it. The other part is speed and agility, and security and resiliency, and injecting those things through the applied research and basic research that's being done in academic institutions all across our country are absolutely vital. And what we have to do is figure out a way to, I believe, to better get large industry, primes in the defense, national security space in particular, who are used to moving at the pace of the federal government, because that's all they've had to do forever. How do you incentivize them to go ahead and really dig in and work closely with academic institutions? Because at the end of the day, everything becomes, well, what's the business case? Like, why should I, have a partnership with Texas A&M as an example? Why would I put together something where I have, 5 master's or PhD students working on a particular problem, that we have at Raytheon, and pay, $200,000, right? Everything's a business case. And so figuring out what that business case is, I don't know if academic institutions do a good job of helping industry see what the real return on investment is. So that would be the other part of it. The technologies exist; they're all essential. They're agile more so, I think, than the primes, right? Because they're just young people, led by really smart people like yourselves. So I think it's absolutely critical, and I think speed of staying up or outpacing potential adversaries is key.
So just a quick, or I'll try to be quick, reaction to that, to follow on what you said. Increasingly, if you are going to be funded through a federal government program to do bench research like this, you are being asked to demonstrate the business case. Now, not everybody knows how to do that. So when we look at the large programs like ARPA-E, DARPA-E, a lot of the big National Science Foundation program areas increasingly are requiring the researchers to demonstrate that they understand the economics of what they're doing, and they're thinking about what those might be going forward. And people like me are helping to advise. So I advise a couple of groups that are ARPA-E funded to exactly think about that. And for many of them, I mean, this is a real leapfrog because when you're really at the bench, it's really hard to imagine what your ultimate application for the product might be. To play on that a little bit and to sort of go back to the role of technology, as you get closer to the business or consumer interface, it becomes a little easier for universities to play those roles. So a couple of things. Supply chain management. There's been active partnerships between universities and information technology firms, large outfits, everybody from Microsoft to Oracle to whoever, who have been trying to figure out how we use blockchain, digitization, to improve supply chain management. And that really accelerated a lot after the COVID experience. And so there's an increasing, effort to try to integrate with where the computing science centers are, especially to be able to work on this. And then when it comes to the pace, how do I get it out of the lab into the market? We have carbon materials, advanced carbon materials that are in the market, but not nearly at the scale that they need to be. And the hang-up is testing and making sure they're safe. How are they going to be deployed? Can they perform the way we need them to? Are they going to meet the requirements of the engineers that are, in the design phase of different products and so on? The Air Force Research Lab was mentioned earlier. AFRL is part of the Materials Genome Initiative that National Science Foundation backs. And one of the ideas is to use machine learning and AI to speed up testing of materials. So how to manage the data, how to be able to accelerate interpretation of results to make sure that we can speed up the lab to commercial phases.
Yeah, one last part on that too is that I failed to mention is digital twins, right? And really leveraging the digital twins to hopefully simplify where you can your product so there aren't 300,000 individual parts perhaps, right? Even if you can get it down to 200,000, that's still a step in the right direction. And then also to stress test, to your point, those things before you really start putting in a lot of money to actually start making a physical product or prototype, and then wait until then to find out that there's a problem when you could have found it out with the digital twins and doing modeling and simulation.
So Vinod, I want to make sure that we give you the opportunity to talk about your projects at Rice with the DAR. And then for the audience here who might not be aware of why we're having so many conversations about national security and defense, John, you and I and Chris, we're talking a little bit about the fallout with South by Southwest and Army Futures last year, and why off-site, unofficial events like Texas House are now performing the duty of being a platform for these conversations. So Vinod, I'd love to hear from you about the role that you all are playing at the Defense Advanced Research Institute at Rice. And then, John, let's talk off the cuff a little bit about why we have to have these conversations here and why these conversations are important for entrepreneurs, for innovators, for startups, for students to learn about ways they can engage with people like you and Michelle and Vinod and the others in the audience.
Thank you. I can point out a couple of interesting examples from Rice. A great example is what Michelle just showed, even with, you can come and check it out later. Rice's core is carbon and materials world, and Rice has done tremendous, leap forward in those areas when it comes to this particular topic of interest. Another interesting related example would be the relationship with Rice and the Woodside Energy Company, trying to take the CO2 and methane and convert that into nanomaterials that can be used into products like developing the next generation of composites, structures, etc., etc. So it's another example. An interesting thing that came up recently was related to the semiconductor industry. There's been lots of discussions on how do we secure the supply chain related matters when it comes to semiconductor industry, but nobody's paying attention to the next generation of materials for semiconductors. So Rice has a Army-supported center that creates synthetic diamond. We actually grow diamond within Rice for ultra-wide bandgap semiconductors, so next generation of semiconductor materials. So there's lots of interesting activities going on. Another interesting thing that happened, again related to semiconductors, we are actually partnering with Texas A&M on that one, is trying to address the PFAS, so the fluorinated materials, as it's related to the semiconductor industry. Because as they ramp up, they figure out that most of the chemicals that they use have issues related to PFAS. So Rice has a center of excellence on addressing PFAS. So there's all these different things that contributes and supports these kinds of issues and challenges. You want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. So to the point of, why is it important, right? And so, one, thank you to Texas House for doing this, hosting this, and allowing these types of discussions to occur in an open, forum. There's others, Capital Factory, Q Branch, and I could list a number of others. But, look, at the end of the day, what I figured out, and it took me a really long time, much longer than it ever should have in my military career, we get national service wrong in this country, right? We talk about the 1%, and that's important, right? 1% who wear the cloth of our nation in some form of service. Service to nation, if we constrict it to just that, it's not very inspirational for the rest of the 99% now, is it, right? And so whether you're a teacher, academic, I don't care what it is you're doing, if it's contributing to the overall good, then it's contributing to our national security, okay? And it doesn't mean you have to agree, but to have open dialogue is one of the fundamental principles that those who chose to be the 1%, also swore a duty to uphold, protect, and defend. And so, if for no other reason, it's important. The other piece is, I tend to believe, my personal opinion, formed probably by 30 years in the military, is that all the other conversations, all the other great things that are going around the city, the music, the appreciation of the arts, health and sciences, etc., don't really matter if we don't have national security. And I've been to places where there is no security, and I can guarantee you nobody's celebrating the arts like they should be. Nobody's celebrating teachers like they should be. Nobody's celebrating police, first responders. Although I joke a little bit sometimes about first responders. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm the one who called 911. You showed up. Wasn't I the first responder? Aren't you the second one? But anyway, you get my point, right? And so it's important that we have these discussions, and whether it's hosted under the umbrella of South by Southwest or it's these satellite events that occur. Again, I applaud everybody who ensures that there's a space for that to happen, especially related to national security.
I want to give a shout out to our friend Luke Fisher and Bill Perkins at Sky-Fi for Awesome for America that they hosted. That was phenomenal. I think an opportunity to engage with experts like you and Michelle and Vinod as well. It is not every day that the audience can mix and mingle with experts of your caliber.
So you want to open it up for a couple of questions?
Yes, do we have any audience questions? Yes.
Thank you. My name is Jorge Cortez, co-founder of Pete Paso, and I've been working on startups, support systems, incubators, accelerators for over 20 years, developing the South Florida and Miami and South Florida ecosystem. So my question is more on the multinodal models that we need to apply, not only here domestically, but internationally, especially in the region of the Americas. What is your position on that? I think it's very relevant to elevate the conversation and the dialogue there. Maybe a large part of the population in the US is not aware, but maybe we are the professionals that need to bring in these topics, and I'd love to hear your perspective on that. And maybe about aerospace development and materials for what you're working on, do you think it's really relevant to go to Mars? I haven't seen other astros out there that could be more valuable as human species and inspire more young people. Is Mars really a target that we need to explore in terms of materials and discoveries? Thank you.
Yeah, so from the multinodal piece of it, right, which I brought up earlier, and then even when I explained, my thoughts on people talking about innovation ecosystems, and then me asking, okay, well, explain that a little bit more, and they can't talk about a vibrant venture, capital, inside of that ecosystem or academia, et cetera. And so I think the way I would frame it, at least initially, when I would think about this, would be look at an innovation ecosystem, look at the parts that I at least shared, I believe, are absolutely required for you to say, if you're X city or X location, region, that we have an innovation ecosystem. Look at those parts and pieces, agree or disagree on those, but start there, add your own. Those become your nodes. Those become the key stakeholders. Those become the key influencers, okay? The next thing I think you have to do is think through how do you deal with the natural tension that exists, and it's good and it's healthy, between innovation and security, right? Because innovation, in a way, almost lends itself to an openness outside of the protection of IP, right? But security, on the other hand, is very much low risk, right? Risk averse. And so thinking through each one of those nodes, how you manage that tension, and then from there, what are the policies, regulations, and laws that make sense? And lastly, how often are we going to go back and revisit those? Because they shouldn't be static, because the world's changing around them. That's kind of how I think I would start to frame it.
That's a really good answer. I like that a lot. And,
First time a professor, I think, has ever said that, or any academic, to me.
well, we could say talk is cheap, but anyway. But I mean, to take it, to a level, I mean, the challenge of the university is to build those multinodal systems, because we have partners at all of our research labs that are international. Different institutions in those networks work on different phases and different applications and other things, and we have to live with all of the rules and the governance and everything else that happens, and so the idea of building hubs, nodes, for innovation at universities is a big deal right now. Everybody's trying to figure that out. As to the Mars question, so one of my little mental mind games that I play is, like, if Elon really wanted to go to Mars, how much of current material would it take to get there? And what it would do, in my rough back of the envelope calculations, is basically prevent us from using that material for other things that people aspire to. It would be very, very intense, materials intense. That said, Rice University, one of our claims to fame is that we were the first NASA university. So famously, JFK makes the speech at our football stadium, the old joke about why does Rice play University of Texas, because it's hard or something. It's like all of that puts us in a position of thinking a lot about various things, like what could space be useful for? And one is harvesting materials from places that, are not on Earth, right? And so in sci-fi is life. If you watch The Expanse and enjoy the books and the series, you are into that kind of thing. It's all rooted in reality. We have samples of taken from places that we think are interesting and could be prospective, whether asteroids or moon rocks or other things. People have been thinking about this for a very long time. Of course, the problem is you have to have the material supply chains to build what you need to be able to harvest that stuff. There are other places closer on Earth that are equally challenging and equally frontier, the Arctic, seabed mining and other things that I think will probably happen first, you know, as we push the envelope out on all of that. I think humans need something to aspire to. So I think that's why everybody is thinking about this so much.
I think last question, one more quick question.
We got time for one more quick, and then for anyone who has remaining questions, we're going to be here, okay? We're going to take a break to network afterwards. So I encourage you to stay and engage directly with John, Michelle, Vinod. I know you had a question. I know we had a few questions. So stay in chat, okay? Got one quick question. All right, close us out.
Hopefully I can meet that mark. Ma'am, two-part question really. So when it comes to material you presented, how do we source that amount of carbon required, and could that spur other industries and companies, things like that? And then the second part is, then how do we scale that? So if the Department of Defense said, I need 200 fighter craft in 7 to 9 years, or 700, 800, 1,000 tanks in 7 to 9 years, how are we going to get to that little step right there to fielding that much material and going to Mars with it as well? Thank you.
That is the $64 gazillion question that we're trying to solve. And if you have a checkbook and a check, we'll take it. No, I'm just kidding. Startup to successful IPO. Oh my God. You know, we're in the valley of death. We're trying to avoid getting stuck in the valley of death, to get from the lab to mass production of all of this. Sources of carbon, that's not the issue. This is a carbon-based planet, so it's everywhere. I mean, you know, we can source this out of the existing carbon footprint, which makes it really appealing to me, because a lot of what I hear people want to do when we talk about things like, quote, energy transition, that involves creating whole new footprints or expanding footprints that are really tough. But I already know where this comes from. I can go to our existing downstream facilities. I can source this today. And if you look at the major oil companies in their vaults of intellectual property, they know how to do that. But the time and the place for bringing that into the market is the question. We can make this at scale. We are currently, our spinoff company from Rice, DexMat, plus other groups that are looking at this. There are several groups in the United States and abroad that are in the process of trying to build scale around carbon nanotube materials today. One of the wonderful things about this is that the mass is so much different than the mass of metal that you need. So you need much less of this to provide a wiring harness for a vehicle as opposed to copper, or to wire a building as opposed to copper or aluminum, or even traditional carbon fiber for carbon fiber applications and composites and that sort of thing. So that's an advantage, but we're still struggling to be able to get to the mile markers in terms of the amount of meters of fiber production that we're trying to get. But we know how to do it. So that's what we need are the large investors to step in, and that is a process that's unfolding to be able to get this into where you would really be able to do substantial things with it.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you very much for joining us. Please give a big round of applause.